Good afternoon, everybody. This is Friday, February 14th, and this is a meeting of the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. My name is Jared Duval, chair of the committee, and welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. Let's just briefly go over our agenda today, which is fairly short and straightforward. We may not take our full hour and a half, but we'll see where the conversation goes. The draft agenda is starting with approval of the minutes and then pausing to just make sure that we're all familiar with and comfortable with the updated guidance in terms of drafting chapters for the climate action plan, and then also the writing assignments and seeing if anybody has any questions about that we can either discuss or pass on to the Climate Action Office. And then I think after we've done that, looking to just check in about each of the chapter drafting leads, see where you're at. I think different chapters are at different points. Some are ready for sharing, some are not yet ready. But as we work towards the March 1st deadline, just wanted to have a space for folks to ask questions, request feedback, share anything that they're wrestling with as we get closer to the deadlines. And then we'll just look to our next meeting, and which I believe is February, is right before the drafting deadline. So I think we have on the calendar one more opportunity to connect as a subcommittee on I believe Friday, February 28th, but we should check in about that. And so that's the agenda overview. Any questions or suggested additions or revisions to the proposed agenda? Okay. Not hearing any. I think we can move ahead with that as is. And if somebody thinks of something, feel free to speak up as we go. But for now, let's begin with the minutes, and I will put in thank you, Liz, for recording them and for linking to them and posting them for anybody who is looking for them. I believe that's the correct link. Does that work? Folks will also have them on the materials page on the calendar page at the climate website. So assuming folks can access the minutes, the draft minutes, any questions, concerns, suggested revisions, or do they? Oh, the one thing I'm seeing is that it does not look like it has an attendance, a list of the committee members present at the meeting, which would be good to add both to that set of minutes for the last meeting and for this one, if that's okay, Liz. Thank you. Does anybody notice anything else about the minutes? Okay. And I think even though we agreed at the end of the minutes, it talks about our next meetings being February 14th and February 28th. Even though my recollection is that we had agreed to a meeting on the 28th, I don't see that yet on the calendar or on the council website. So if we could also add that, Liz, unless I'm missing something.
I sent out a calendar invite that everyone should have received, but I'll check the website as well.
Oh,
We're
no,
talking
I
about,
do see it. I was on the wrong week.
oh,
My
okay.
apologies. Yes,
Yeah.
February 20th, 1 to 2:30.
Yeah.
See that calendar invitation. Was I correct, though, that it's not yet on the website? But that's, I mean, because we usually wait until we have an agenda and materials anyway, right, Liz?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll add that. But that's, yeah, at least the calendar invite's out. So
Okay,
you guys got that. Yeah.
great. Thanks. Anything else about the minutes before we consider them approved and move forward? Okay. Hearing nothing, we'll consider them approved with the addition of the attendance lists. Oh, thanks, Claire. I see your note in the chat. Okay, just to make sure that we all have the same context, I wanted to pause and thank you, Liz, for posting the updated drafting guidance and the kind of chapter drafting kind of list of lead authors and responsibilities for drafting. So maybe I will just go ahead and share each of those, and I want to point out a couple of things briefly. Do folks see this document, the 2025 Climate Action Plan Table of Contents and Drafting Leads?
Yep.
Great, thanks, Tara. So and Liz, thank you for your work on this. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that were obvious to me that were new and updated about this since we last saw and discussed this. One is this final column around the max word count, which will hopefully help provide some context about what length we are aiming for. And my understanding is the Climate Action Office is going to be very strict about that, and that we need to adhere to it. Otherwise, words will be cut without, by the Climate Action Office. One question I had, Liz, about the word counts is, like, for instance, the chapter that I drafted on the scientific underpinning of the climate action plan, it's coming in a bit under, and I'm wondering, I know that there are some other chapters where folks are feeling really crunched to be able to get it under that. I'm wondering if there might be, is this target really about the length of each chapter, or is it about the length of the plan? And if we go under in one, can we reassign that extra word count to another chapter that may need it more, is a question that I have.
Yeah, no, we could have it's a ladder, so we could absolutely do that. That's kind of behind the intention of us gathering with sections of chapters as much as we can over the next couple weeks, is seeing where folks are over and under, whether it's
Yeah.
mitigation or something else, and trying to balance that out. So yeah, letting me know the number, we could work that out. It could definitely be under.
It's not a lot under, but I think that
Yeah.
this one is like right now at 1,200 rather than 1,500. So maybe
Okay,
another science and data subcommittee chapter can get an extra
great.
100 words.
Yep, I'll update that. That's great.
Great. So any questions on this document? I don't think anything has changed about lead authors or due dates.
Jared, this is Richard. Is there a standard approach to the substantive chapters? That is, I found the previous iteration of the plan very difficult to work with to understand, because statements of goals were done in many different formats and very in different relationships to the underlying material. I mean, is there a standard format that says here's what a SMART goal is going to look like in our plan? It's going to be measurable and targeted and have a due date and have responsibilities assigned. Is there a standard approach there?
There is a suggested standard approach around the chapters dealing with substantive recommendations. I think we're primarily working on chapters that set context or share information that sets the context for the plan. So I hear you and agree with you, Richard, on the chapters that will relate to the specific substantive recommendations coming forward from, like, the cross-sector mitigation, rural resilience, ag and ecosystem subcommittees. I'm not sure to what degree that format is going to be relevant for our more context-setting chapters.
Yeah, fair enough.
Science and data, but
Fair enough.
Liz, anything else? Because I believe that you work quite a bit on this. So this is the other document that has updated drafting guidance, which is incredibly helpful because it's not just about the substance and what we're looking for, but it's also got some really good information so that we've got consistency and can save some time on titles, on formats, on fonts, on sizes, on line numbering and page numbers. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody saw this because there's a lot of work went into it and there's some really good information here that I think will save us all time and make it easier to review the drafts when they're ready and compile the draft cap. So just want to see if anybody has any questions about this guidance, or Liz, if you want to emphasize or add anything to this.
Yeah, I think that covers it. This really helped guide the approach to writing the narratives. And then the formatting piece as well. And then the more specific word counts are in the other assignments document that is linked there.
Great. Anybody have any questions about this, especially while we still have Liz, because I believe Liz is going to have to leave it. Breck, yes, please.
Just a comment that when I just explored it a little bit for context, when formatted the way that is described here, that 2,500 words translates to about maybe 8 or 9 pages.
Yeah, that's helpful. Anybody else? Any questions about this guidance document? Then I will, oh yeah, Claire, please.
Does the word count include citations? Sorry, Jared, can you hear me?
I can. I was deferring to Liz.
So if you click on that cap outline assignments document, yeah. And then it says in the max word count that does not include citations, references, or word charts, graphics.
But there's a little bit of a confusion there because it includes footnotes. So if citations are in footnotes, what is going to be the format? Are citations to be put in footnotes, or will citations be put at the end of each chapter or the end of the entire document or whatever? So it does seem to be a little bit of confusion there.
I believe that there's guidance in here that says the citations should either be a direct link to a website. I'm trying to find, oh, here it is, or use the Chicago style citation for referenced publications. So I wonder if the distinction there is that a footnote would be kind of an explanatory note that accompanies the text, but citations would really just be the Chicago style citations of publications or links to websites.
Yeah, that's my interpretation as well.
Yeah. But good question and clarification, Breck.
And I think why Breck was asking that question, and thanks for flagging it, Breck, is because it was specifically called out in the last plan that you had to do it as footnotes and endnotes. Which made it a little bit challenging because of the number of things that you had to put in there. And so if this is going to look more like a scientific document with citations or within the text, it'll be easier, cleaner, but just to make sure everybody has caught that.
Yeah, and I'll reach out to Sophie just to double check, but my understanding was that we were linking things when possible, but I'll double check that.
Okay. Thanks, Liz.
Yep.
Oh, and one other question that I asked of Liz and Sophie that I don't think was addressed in the guidance document, but the guidance document may be updated to include is the question of whether hyperlinks are allowed. I found it helpful in the first plan that when there was a direct link to include hyperlinks for folks who are reading the PDF and want to be able to just click on things. And correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, but I think the guidance back was that hyperlinks are allowed to be inserted.
Yes.
If we do hyperlinks, it might be a good idea to at least still have the entire URL somewhere like a lot of federal sites, when you actually go to print it out, it prints out with the full URL. Because sometimes if you're reading stuff offline, or if you're printing it out and doing something else with it, then a hyperlink may or may not work. And so if you want to continue delving a little bit deeper to be able to go back to like the original source and so on. So just, I mean, all of this is great stuff. I'm glad we're having this conversation because it just spurs a couple other additional things to kind of mention and to flag.
And I think also helpful to have a citation with the full URL, as you say, Leslie, and in addition to a hyperlink, in case clearly there are instances where websites become out of date or are taken down. And so being able to try to track backwards and find where something was, especially if it has been changed or removed, is helpful, which is just easier to see with the full URL written out than in case somebody can't actually hover and get the hyperlink address. But okay, Claire, is the
Yeah, well, I had maybe more of just a process question before Liz leaves us, and I apologize if this is in the guidance and I haven't caught it yet, but I know that the schedule for drafting includes like kind of the first draft due date, I think is what the language says, and then I know the council will be reviewing drafts at their meeting in March 10th, but is there still opportunity for review at the subcommittee level, or is it really that after March 1st, like all the drafts are really up at the council level? Yeah, I just wasn't sure what the process was after March 1st.
Yeah, I mean, technically at this point, it's really all at the council level, even for the drafting. I mean, councilors are working with subcommittee members or a handful of subcommittee members who maybe have expertise, but yeah, so I think it'll just continue to be more the councilors leading the effort, but it's kind of up to them how much, it makes sense to seek expertise from subcommittee members at that point, I think.
Okay, thanks, that's helpful.
Yeah.
I imagine that part of it will depend on whether and what type of feedback comes in either from the council or during the public comment period. And I would imagine this especially with relation to Science and Data Subcommittee, that if there's technical questions or things that are requested additions, that would likely come back to and involve the subcommittee. But yeah, I think that is an important reminder that this is, I mean, it's meant to be a complete first draft, but it's still a first draft, and the council and the general public will have the opportunity to comment on it, and we'll still have until additional time over the late spring and early summer to finalize these. Okay. So at this point, I think what I want to create space for, and no expectations, but because I think that different drafting groups are at different points in their process. So I just want to see if anybody wants to provide an update on their process, if anybody has questions or is running into challenges that may be helpful just to open up to subcommittee conversation. And I think I know that I believe that Tara has to leave by 2, so I might start just to check in with what I believe is our largest drafting group on the climate change in Vermont chapter. I hope I'm getting that title right. Leslie Ann, would you be willing to just give a brief update and share where you're at in the process?
Sure. So for the climate and climate change in Vermont section that we're writing, we've met a total of 3 times, including this morning. And what we've been working through are what we would like to have in terms of basic content, but also the figures. We went through and looked at which figures we wanted to keep, which ones we wanted to tweak, get rid of. We did that back in December. And so a lot of what we're trying to do revolves around how you want to present it and make sure that it is accessible, make sure that it's in plain language, make sure that there's no visual fumbling when folks are picking up the document to read it. And so we've gotten to the point where we now have about 7 to 9 key messages. And I think that's going to change a little bit now that we know exactly what that page limit sort of comes out to be. Most of the key messages sort of like in a cascading order. So it starts off with the broad rationale for why do we see some of the impacts and effects of climate change in Vermont. A lot of it has to do with the geography, the geology, the history of us as peoples on the land that we walk on. And then it sort of goes into what are some of the hazards that we're particularly prone to, and how some of those hazards are changing, and some of the processes and physics behind that. And then from there, it gets into a lot of the impacts, either by some of the sectors, by ecosystems, by peoples, and then it ends, or it's going to end, with data gaps as well as opportunities in each of these various spaces. So it's very much a work in progress, but every time we get together, we don't inch. I think we race towards getting more of a cohesive feel for what it is we're trying to bring across, and how to do it in a way that the folks picking up the plan can actually see themselves in the plan while consuming a lot of what we're trying to talk about in terms of what has changed since the last plan back in 2021. So that's where we are right now. But it's in no way, shape, or form ready for prime time. So that's why I'm not sharing anything visually right now.
Great, thank you. And I'll just note that in case it's helpful either to you and team Leslie Ann, or to David and team, there are a couple of graphics that we've created at EAN looking at climate-related disasters in Vermont and the increase in extreme heat days, looking at temperature data from Burlington. I'll just put those in the chat in case they are relevant or helpful to either of you. Let me see. Oh, it says transfer of JPEG files is restricted by your account admin. Oh, because I think I open image in new tab. That's what I was trying to do, not a JPEG. I just want the link. In case either of these are relevant or helpful to either drafting group, I just want to share them. Yeah, Tara, please.
Sorry, Jared, for those figures that you're trying to post, is there any EAN work that kind of goes sort of beyond just the, let's say, temperature data, and then moving on, or disaster data, and then connecting it with emissions directly? Or is that a roundabout connection?
Yeah, we kind of present those separately and independently. So I included a graph that uses the state inventory data on emissions in the scientific underpinning of the chapter, but that's kind of a statewide Vermont number, and we don't have something on global emissions in our chapter, although I imagine that may be something that the climate and climate change in Vermont group may be looking at. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it just, that thought keeps gnawing at me, that we often present these pieces of information separately, and by the time you've kind of looked at all the science and the impacts, you've forgotten that the whole Global Warming Solutions Act, I mean, all of the science is toward the emissions. And so, I mean, at least in the chapter writing, I know we're trying to work on that, but if there were already some connections that someone else has made, either in graphs or pictures, and even if it's an example, I think that would be helpful. So, for example, from the July 2023 floods in Montpelier, following that, the emissions that resulted in responding to some of those emergencies. And if anytime there's an extreme heat event, we're running maybe more of the heat or cold or whatever the conditioning, temperature conditioning systems. There's fuel used in all the vehicles that end up coming for disaster response. There's all the pumps that we're running in basements to pump out the water. So I just feel like, how are we thinking about those emissions in the context of the hazards and responses to hazards? Because then I feel like I want to make that argument for why adaptation and how mitigation kind of fit in as solutions in the future. So for me, like that's the piece that keeps getting stuck in my head. So I just wanted to see if someone's done some of that mapping. That would be cool to present.
And just to piggyback on what Tara said, it's really important to have statewide representation when we're doing a lot of this, because all of these changes and effects and impacts that we're seeing are across the state itself. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to do with our writing is to make sure that we've got examples and graphs and maps and whatever from across the state, or at least pointing to examples from across the state, so that it then becomes the true story of what it looks like in Vermont, and not, you know, like only on one section or the other.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, anything else from the climate and climate change in Vermont drafting group? Thanks for that update, Leslie, and thanks for all of the work that you and the team are doing, all the planning and thinking and good drafting going into that. Looking forward to seeing that draft when it's ready.
And I'll pass the kudos on to the group because it is a group effort.
David or Ken, or I'm happy to, whoever wants to go next. Thanks, Liz. David, if you want me to give you some time, if it's better to wait until you're more settled, or be in the car the whole time, feel free to just go now.
Yeah, I'll go now. My son was nice enough to pull over so that I wouldn't be car sick while I'm talking. So status, or maybe overview for my chapter. There have been a lot of places in the past where the health impacts of climate change have been summarized. National Climate Assessment, the Vermont Climate Assessment out of UVM. What I've tried to do, because I don't want to just replicate those efforts, is I'd like to try to do something additive. And the gap that I see is that those previous efforts at doing a summary don't necessarily square with people's experience who have been affected by climate disasters. And maybe an example of that is if you look in the state hazard mitigation plan or state hazard mitigation appendices, there are Excel spreadsheets that will total up like the total number of injuries or deaths associated with different types of hazards, including floods. And you'll see that like for the last 25, 30 years, there will be 3 deaths associated with floods and 1 injury, which clearly doesn't square with sort of a common sense understanding of the experience of Tropical Storm Irene or the floods of the last 2 summers. So how do we address the gap between what shows up in our official statistics and what people's experience is of the health and well-being impacts of being in an area that's been adversely impacted by climate change? So what I'm trying to do in my 3,000 words is to create a conceptual framework that talks about how climate impacts the infrastructure that health depends upon. So that includes physical infrastructure, economic infrastructure, social infrastructure. Make those linkages explicit, and then talk about the societal impacts that happen when things like housing and transportation are adversely impacted by climate change. So societal impacts like population displacement, student absenteeism, reduced educational attainment, job loss, substance use, increased costs for homeowners insurance and property taxes, financial insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity, bankruptcy, business failure, homelessness, and reduced access to healthcare. So this sort of like middle tier of social phenomena that are not in and of themselves, what the health department usually captures as health outcomes, but are really where things are felt in terms of the economic and physical dislocation that severe events cause. And then make the final linkage between those sort of societal level impacts and individual level impacts like mold-related illness, mental health outcomes, stress-related illnesses, anxiety, hypertension, overdose, heart disease, life expectancy, etc. And in that way, try to do sort of a more comprehensive job at capturing the actual human experience of extreme weather events. There's been a little bit of research that Richard Hopkins helped direct me towards, which compares the magnitude of sort of the immediate impacts of a weather disaster with the long-term ramifications and health impacts of that disaster. And the best example that I found thus far is for tropical cyclones. And with the methodology that they use in a paper published in Science, the scope or scale of those long-term impacts is, 1 to 2 orders of magnitude greater than the immediate sort of deaths and injuries that are associated with a hurricane. And so I'm making sort of a speculative argument that sort of what we can see above the surface in terms of health impacts is really just a fraction of this larger body of human experience, which is, I think, harder to quantify and attribute with certainty, because if you're looking at something like opioid-related overdoses, how many of those are directly attributable to climate impacts? I'm certainly not in a position to do that analysis or be able to speculate. So that's the big project, and it I think serves as a good foundation for a brief discussion of who is impacted, and being able to make the case that the people who are impacted are those who are living closest to the margins or to the edge of housing insecurity, financial insecurity, where it doesn't, it takes a nudge for them to find themselves in a situation that can adversely impact their lives and their health. And that sort of helps kind of focus the mind around what are the actions that can be taken in order to give those populations a bigger buffer so that they can be more resilient when there are these sort of extreme stressors on their lives. And kind of the conclusion that I'm coming to is it really doesn't matter if you're talking about an extreme weather event, or you're talking about a pandemic or some other sort of economic dislocation. Like it's always going to be these same groups of people who are living on the margins, who have, the smallest cushion or insulation from those shocks, that are going to be the ones who experience the first and worst of the effects. So I think that's sort of the summary. The challenges that I'm finding is that's a big project to try to accomplish in 3,000 words. Doing sort of the general, making those links based on published literature, and finding the Vermont specific examples to try to substantiate, potential relationships between the weather disasters that we've experienced and some of those intermediate outcomes like bankruptcy, like job loss, ideally I'd like to be able to find the statistics, for example, in Washington County, to try to back up like, oh, do you see anything happening in those areas that have been worst affected subsequent to some of the climate events? And I don't know that I'm honestly going to get that far. Only maybe question that comes to mind right now is other people's take on, like, I'm sure I could have 15 different figures, but how do you choose and sort of be sparing in, I mean, it's good, I think, to have a visual medium and visual reinforcement, but I think I could also go overboard with that. So if anyone has thoughts to like how to limit yourself to only the most compelling figures, I'd be interested in hearing that too.
I think the good news that sorry,
And
go
my
ahead.
goal is to try to have a completed draft by Monday. That's my sort of self-imposed goal, because I just need to be able to move on from this and start working on other things.
Fair enough. I think it was helpful that Liz said that, the graphs and the figures do not count towards the word count. So as much as it is helpful to try to prioritize and be sparing, I think that it's also helps make the chapters that much more accessible and interesting. So it's nice that we don't have to feel overly limited there. I will say I really appreciate and agree with the flow and format you're laying out. I think it'll align and build on, have a nice flow between the climate and climate change in Vermont chapter and the economy chapter that Ken is working on. And I think it'll align with the goal of making the climate action plan that much more accessible and relevant to the general public. And yeah, I think one of the things, this is just an observation from working on my chapter, I wonder if it's helpful to you, is that, given the short word counts we have to work with, I found myself a lot of times trying to, in a pithy, clear way, summarize what has happened to date, but for like longer explanations, just linking out to other reports that are really relevant. And I feel like making sure that we're pointing to them in the cap enables the cap to do more work or go farther. But that, as you were saying, a lot of this ground has been tread. And so the extent to which we can point to, link to those reports and use our limited space to either kind of clearly summarize them in an understandable way so people know their value and then go see them, or add new material that does not yet exist, I think sounds really right on. But I'm curious if others have thoughts or feedback based on what David shared.
This is Richard. David, you're always welcome to come work in any health department I have, where I have the opportunity. That's kind of an empty offer, but I'm impressed by the depth and quality of the thought that you put into this. It's really excellent work. I appreciate it. I just have one comment. It's a little bit tangential. It's related to your comment that the people living on the margins are the worst hurt by many different kinds of events. And the flip side of that is that if we do a good job with our mitigation, they will be the people who will benefit the most by not having those harms. And so, we need to think that everything we do that limits fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions, in fact, will benefit first those people who are on the margins, as you described them.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Claire, please.
Yeah, I'll just echo, I think this approach really resonates. Well, it kind of has every time you've presented it. And I will send you a link to the current draft of the Just Transitions chapter, because when we were talking about it at our meeting last night, I flagged that it feels like it could reference your chapter, because it does tee up at a high level, like who who do we think of as like frontline and impacted communities in Vermont? And I think, again, they're trying to be brief. So I had suggested they could link to the near chapter, which may like go a little deeper. And that also may prevent you from needing to like explain at a high level who frontline and impacted communities are, and you could just go into the details. So that link is online. I'll send you it to you so you have a sense. I don't think it will change substantively this month. And I didn't get any other feedback other than what Sophie sent you, but I did circulate it to that group.
Great. Thank you, Claire.
The other thought I had about, you know, beyond the official statistics and there being like limited literature was I wonder if there may be anecdotes that could be pulled from like some of the media coverage of, like, I'm thinking of like some of the work VPR did and talking to folks. And yeah, that was just the one thought you may have already had, but I thought I'd bring it up.
I have had that thought, and I have tried to do that on a limited basis, but if you have favorite stories that stuck out to you that were compelling narratives of people's experience of losing their housing or how they were economically impacted by the floods, by all means, please do send those to me.
Yeah, and I'm feeling like I remember stories of like people repeatedly, like the same people experiencing multiple disasters was what was coming to mind. So I'll see if I can find a couple.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I remember this Digger article being really in line with what Claire was suggesting and what you just asked for, David. I don't have the link, but I have the article title because we cited it in our latest EAN annual progress report for Vermont. So I'll just put the title in there, and if you search that, there were some really compelling stories and good journalism and reporting there. Leslie Ann.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I'm wondering if we could share those more broadly, because I think we're starting to get to the point where this is how you get a plan that is a one voice plan, by everybody referencing everybody else and not doing it in silos. And so to the extent that, I mean, we've already talked about reaching out to and pointing to at least 3 other places, including not just stuff David's working on, not just the stuff that Ken's working on, but also what Chris is working on in ag ecosystems, what David Mears is working on. Sorry, the other way around. Chris is working on stuff for rural resilience, and David Mears is working on stuff for ag and ecosystems. If we all point to what each other's doing, it just makes it more of a cohesive read for anybody who might want to read from top of the document all the way to the bottom. So all those things that we're sharing, if we can share them broadly and globally, that would be awesome. And I just wanted to say to David and team, wow. And I could see this going on in so many different directions and being so beneficial in a lot of the work that the department is probably doing, is thinking of doing, all of the revamping of things like social vulnerability tool and all of those other pieces in there. This could be such a wonderful foundational model or bit of work to build on. And so, I mean, it's amazing. So thanks for taking this up and sort of running with it. I know it's challenging and hard, but oh my goodness me, I'm just waiting to see what the end result looks like. And I know you too.
Thanks, Leslie.
Great stuff. Before I move to Ken and then me on the chapters that we're leading on, I want to pause just to make sure we don't lose anybody, because I know we've already had a couple people who had to drop off. In terms of the timeline from here on out, like David, you shared, you're hoping to have this done early to mid next week and be able to share. I know Ken is working on his draft, and I know you're writing group, Leslie Ann. So just working backwards from, if we're going to have a subcommittee meeting on Friday, February 28th, which is technically the chapter drafts are due March 1st, which is a Saturday. So I'm presuming that really means end of day or end of business on Friday, February 28th. So that's not going to leave a lot of time to incorporate feedback, although there will be some time this afternoon, that afternoon. So what I'm wondering is how much time would folks want to review the chapters that are being led by this subcommittee? And I'm wondering if there's a common date we could identify by which the drafts for the health chapter, the climate and climate change in Vermont, and the Vermont energy economy, et cetera, chapter could be ready, and that I could then share out with the full subcommittee if they're emailed to me, and we could post ahead of that February 28th meeting. Just because I'm worried that if we only have the time for feedback and discussion that meeting, there may not be a lot of time to incorporate it. Whereas if we can get the documents out earlier, it could give people the chance to download them and provide some suggested edits or comments and track changes, and then send them back ahead of time. So maybe, not to put you on the spot, but maybe David, Ken, and Leslie Ann, can you just share what you're thinking now for a doable due date that we might be able to share them all out, to give the subcommittee a little bit of time for review and feedback?
I'll say I will get mine done next Thursday, February 20th. And I might as well throw in my complication. I'm unavailable on February 28th. So I have to think about whether I'm certainly happy to have someone edit the piece after those discussions on the 28th, but I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to participate in the meeting and not be able to edit. I'll be away. I come back on Sunday, March, whatever that is, 2nd.
Okay. Yeah, we can either ask for an extension until Monday. I doubt anyone's going to be reading it over the weekend anyway, or I could take that up before you can, if you're going to be away that day.
But I can get a product February 20th.
Okay. And David, you had said, what was it? Sounds like that would potentially work for you as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to have a complete draft by end of day on the 17th. And can share it, then or anytime afterwards.
Okay. And it may be that we're just all on different timelines, and rather than trying to align all of them, we should just share them when we have them. Just to give more time for those ones that are ready earlier. Leslie Ann, I'm wondering what you're...
I like that idea because we haven't gotten to the point of having something that is shareable. So I don't want to speculate, guesstimate, and speak for the 8 or 10 folks who are working on this to say a specific date. So if we want to do a rolling thing in the sense of hours coming in last, I would be comfortable with that. And I would say next week I'd be able to at least give an idea of what a tentative date might look like.
Okay. Great. And I know we're all busy and have a lot going on, but I know I for one would be happy to prioritize review, even if it comes in, early to midweek of the 24th. And knowing that this is really just to put our best foot forward in terms of the draft, but there will be additional opportunities for revision as we get feedback from the council and the public.
And the other thing that Liz said to me is that they understand the I guess walking carefully on when we put out drafts, because then they become public documents that stay around forever, which was one of the things that I try to get a clearer understanding of. So the documents that we share are going to be shared with the council in the in-person meeting on the 10th of March. And so that's the point at which that should be finalized, to the extent that everybody who is involved in the writing process is then comfortable with that becoming that public of a document.
Yep. Makes sense. Thanks. Breck?
I have a note in my calendar that meeting on the 28th was to include a review of the Stockholm Energy Institute report. Is that still something that's happening?
It's a great question. I had the same question because in the council meeting that we had on Monday, there was originally on that agenda an update on the business as usual modeling, on the LEAP modeling update that SEI was working on. And that fell off the agenda. It was really the whole Climate Council agenda on Monday was about the report that Cambridge Analytics and Resources for the Future did on looking at cap and invest and low carbon fuel standard policy. So my assumption, I think we need to ask the Climate Action Office where things stand with SEI. But that is really important information in terms of setting targets for the recommendations, in terms of knowing where we're at and what the estimates on business as usual are. So I will follow up with the Climate Action Office about that. Thank you for flagging that. It's really important.
It just puts an extra constraint on what we have to try to accomplish on that one day.
Yeah. Yeah, if it is available. Yeah, and I think that can go in a couple of different directions. One would be all the more reason to, once documents are shared, send comments and suggested track changes back to the author directly, so we don't have to do too much of that in committee time. But then also, if there is going to be review of the SEI modeling, we may want to consider extending the meeting a little bit, if possible. Or we may need to schedule an additional meeting if it's not ready yet, which would be unfortunate and problematic. But I'm thinking that if we haven't heard anything, I don't know if it's going to be ready. We'll have to see. Claire, did you have any information about that? No. Okay. It
I
looks
know
like
that I was going to say, I know that we've been in touch with ANR about data requests to support the modeling, but I don't have a current update on the status.
Okay. And I see Liz, I believe, is back, or maybe Liz is just there as co-host, but away for something else. So if you are here, Liz, and you have any information about that, that'd be great. If not, I understand that you're likely away. Okay. I am happy to, or Ken, is there anything else that you want to share about your drafting process, kind of where you stand, any information?
Yeah, I'll just give a kind of a summary, and I'll say, unfortunately, I've been doing this backwards. Jared, I shared some material with Jared without really understanding a structure. Now after doing that, now I have a structure. So I'll try to describe that briefly to you folks, and we'll call it 4 or 5 facets. The first report put the initial concentration of economics in terms of fuel purchases. We spend $2 to $3 billion a year on fuels, largely fossil fuels. And the second facet is a sort of a recognition. Whenever people spend money, that money is circulating the economy. So how does that $2 to $3 billion get reflected in economic activity within the state, which is, we all often use employment as sort of a proxy for that. And so those two were kind of, I'll say, the emphasis in the first plan. And what I mentioned last time is a third facet. We also spend money on the devices, cars, heating plants, appliances in the kitchen that use those fossil fuels. So that's another piece of sort of economic activity, and kind of the sub facet there is when we do that, and those purchases are in the sort of couple $100 million range for buildings, and then in the multiple $1 billion range in terms of transportation. But just say, so the kind of following that pattern, yeah, when you spend that money, that also has economic activity represented in the economy. And then I'll say the final facet, which is challenging within the scope of this overall project, is that this plan is the identification of investments to reduce fossil fuel use. And I'm leaving out the ag stuff for now, but in terms of the thermal sector and the transportation sector, these investments, things like weatherization, things like the purchase of devices like heat pumps in the thermal sector, heat pump hot water heaters, conduction stoves, that's another economic activity that leads to certainly reduction in fossil fuel use, but then also has that sub facet. So it is an economic activity that has employment associated with it. But I say this raises the challenge, because that then is what people really look at as the overall plan. In other words, what is the cost effectiveness? If we spend X million dollars on these reduction strategies that reduce fossil fuel use, the piece that was in the first plan was the marginal abatement cost curve, but unfortunately we just didn't get a chance to really review that thoroughly. And so I'm saying I'm not going to be able to do that here, but at least I'm going to, recognize that in terms of the economics, that is, a facet that's very, very, very important, and one that I hope the overall plan process puts more significant emphasis on, because I will say, I was involved quite a bit into the clean heat standard. That piece of economics really influenced a lot of people, and yet it was not very well developed. It's it's going to raise the cost of fuel oil $1. Well, one scenario of one implementation plan it definitely would have, but in fact, that was never going to be an implementation strategy that was carried forward. Anyway, I'm just raising this because economically, that's what people really are looking for, but it's going to be well beyond the scope of this chapter. But anyway, I just wanted to tee it up for you folks to know that at least I'm going to frame it as such, and then sort of, I'll say, reference the rest of the document to say these are costs and impacts that people are very, very interested in. It is the design of strategies that ultimately leads to that economic analysis that will not be in this chapter, but needs to be captured elsewhere in the document. So a weakness that I will attempt to address, but probably only do it qualitatively, is the equity issue. In other words, all of this stuff we can do in gross scale, but I'll mention the references in terms of the energy burden, the inequitable energy burden piece, but also with those other facets, just a recognition that as we are changing the pattern of fuel use, changing the pattern of investments in things like buildings, in vehicle purchases, always just mention it qualitatively, just always keep that equity lens. It's not just the gross impact in terms of billions of dollars, it's the distribution of those impacts, which is always going to be important. And as I also mentioned, the sort of the agricultural sector and probably some of the industrial sector, I probably just, won't be doing as much there, but I'll try to, include a couple sentences that this similar approach is important for those topics as well.
Thanks, Ken. I look forward to that, to your draft.
I was just gonna comment quickly, Ken. I think the way you framed that piece about the equity and the distribution of impacts mirrors one of the challenges that the Just Transitions chapter is highlighting about kind of this process as a whole, which is that recommendations are often or have tended to be high enough level that they don't get into the implementation details, which is what actually really influences whether the outcomes are equitable. So it feels like that's a nice parallel of you teeing up that as an important issue that needs to be framing all of this work, and that one that is challenging to address in this type of work where we are not getting into the details of implementation or always have the time to do that detailed analysis. So potentially another place to cross-reference, but a nice, I think,
Yes.
parallel way.
So I will do my best in the first draft and truly invite support. In other words, have people help me make sure that that language really does reflect the concern, the need.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Ken. I'll just give a brief update. The scientific underpinning of the Climate Action Plan chapter, last time around, set context for a lot of the data and analysis that underpinned the development of the Climate Action Plan and the recommendations that followed in other chapters. And so the first time around, it included a summary of what the social cost of carbon was and why identifying that value was important to some of the benefit cost analysis that underpinned the first plan. An overview of Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions inventory and some of the supplemental analysis that has accompanied it, and then the development of a carbon budget for Vermont. And in the first Climate Action Plan, all of those pieces were new. We had to establish a social cost of carbon for Vermont for use and benefit cost analysis. We needed to do a review of our inventory methodology and identify, where we were following best practices and where there might be data that was even more detailed and accurate than some of the default state inventory tools available at the federal level. And there was a carbon budget developed for Vermont that around that first plan. Since then, everyone on this subcommittee will remember, we have updated our social cost of greenhouse gas estimates to align with the November 2023 report from the EPA. So that has been updated in terms of our foundation for how we approach benefit cost analysis related to greenhouse gas emissions as a state. We have a new greenhouse gas inventory that is now accompanied by a full methodology document. So it used to be that our GHG inventory was just, here are the emissions, here's how they break down by sector, here's what they were in these reference years or baseline years. Now there's a whole companion document, supporting document that says, here are the assumptions and methodologies and data choices that underpin the inventory. And that methodology document links to some of the supplemental analysis that has been done related to life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, related to Vermont's energy use, related to land use and land use change and forestry emissions, and the carbon budget. My understanding is that there is not a new carbon budget that has been done for Vermont or that has been updated. So in the draft that is posted on our site and that I shared with all of you, I focused on the two things that have been updated, and so that we're focusing on what is new in this plan, and that is the updated social cost of greenhouse gases values, the updated inventory and companion methodology document, but I do not in this current draft go into the carbon budget because it's already referenced in the methodology document for the inventory as a supplemental resource, and because I don't want to confuse people in that the Global Warming Solutions Act is clear that the way that our progress towards and the legal attainment of our emissions reductions obligations is in line with the inventory and its established methods and practices. So the carbon budget is referenced, but doesn't have its own whole sub chapter as before because it hasn't been updated, and it is secondary to the inventory in terms of compliance with the Solutions Act, which is what the Climate Action Plan is written for. So that's my initial thinking, but I would welcome either feedback now, or if folks have comments or suggested edits that you want to send to me and track changes. Even though there's a PDF posted on the website, I believe I sent to the committee a Word doc version if that's easier to work with. So would welcome that. Any questions or feedback for either Ken or I? Ken or me? Sorry. Science and Data Subcommittee, not the Science and Grammar. I have to be more careful. My son just learned he's in the school spelling bee, so we've been practicing all week. Me or I will not be words chosen, though. All right, save me from myself. Anybody have anything? If not, thank you. Look forward to any comments you might have on the Word documents, either that have been shared or that will be soon shared. Breck.
Just to Leslie Ann. Leslie Ann, do you have 5 minutes to meet?
I do. So I'm probably gonna ask Claire, are you the last SOV person here to actually stop the recording? Or did you want to jump on a different call, Breck?
I was going to jump on a different call.
Okay.
I can hit you with Teams.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think Elizabeth is technically still here, but I think she's the only one who can stop the recording. So I assume she'll take care of that when we hop off.
I'll just call you by Teams, Leslie Ann.
Awesome. Okay, I'll get that open then.
Maybe the recording just stops when we all leave. I don't know.
But then where does the transcript go? Unless it's actually not activated. But
Yeah.
soon find out.
I want to pause. I don't see any members of the public, but I just want to make sure. Just want to give an opportunity for public comment if anyone would like to. Hearing or seeing none. I think the last thing is just the next meeting agenda. And until I feel like it is going back to your question, Breck, we need to check in, and I will check in with the Climate Action Office about the modeling around the business as usual emissions scenario and where the Climate Action Office stands in their work with SEI and whether that is an agenda item for the 28th as originally planned or whether that will change. But if anyone has any additional thoughts that you want to share in terms of either agenda items or how we approach that meeting on the 28th, I would welcome it. My assumption is that we're primarily just having a final chance to check in and provide updates and provide any feedback on the chapter drafts before they get formally submitted. Does that sound good to folks? Okay. Anything else before we formally adjourn a little bit early? Okay.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, you as well. If you were all in Montpelier, it's impressive. All of the pillars on the state capitol have massive hearts on them from the Montpelier Valentine's Day Phantom. So usually we see the hearts in all of the windows of businesses and establishments downtown, but now there are hearts on the pillars of the State House and even, I think, silhouetting the clock face of the clock tower on City Hall in Montpelier. So it's kind of a fun thing to walk through downtown and see today. All right, great to see you all. Thank you all for your work.
Thanks, everyone.
Liz, are you there? Just gonna leave. I think it'll automatically end.